November 12, 2017. My name is Kuldip Randhawa. I live in Surrey, BC, British Columbia, a province of Canada, a nation considered at the forefront of human rights. I have posted a number of videos on YouTube. This particular video concerns itself with the APEGBC fraud. APEGBC in short stands for the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia. It is a regulatory body that regulates the profession of engineers in British Columbia. Members who are professional engineers or grad students can actually pay fees on a yearly basis and become members of this organization. So they are collecting fees on the basis that a learned profession, such as engineering, has to be regulated by the profession itself. So a person, for example, who is being investigated appears before his peers. In generally, when you have a discipline process at the Engineering Association, and I appeared before that body in April 2005 concerning a structure. I would say structure because I do not want people to think that it was a water tank, because it was supposed to be an investigation of a water tank failure, but I'm going to try and use the structure instead of water tank. And even if I refer in this video to a water tank, I want the person seeing this video to make a mental note or make a note by pen on a piece of paper that the structure was not a water tank, but I will be referring to it as such in order that I can describe the matters to you. So when the panel of engineers are selected by the Engineering Association, there are essentially 3 professional engineers who are selected to adjudicate an engineering matter. The matter cannot be determined by the Supreme Court of British Columbia because judges or masters are not part of the learned profession. They're not professional engineers. And so we have professional bodies that regulate dentists, doctors, lawyers that are quasi-judicial, and the mandate is to ensure that the investigation of engineers is to a high level. And so when you're appearing before your peers, that is sort of guaranteed because one does not expect that professional engineers would be regulating a matter to a standard which is quite low. So the Supreme Court of British Columbia and some justices of that court have actually established the standard of how this Engineering Association needs to regulate the profession. And so that definition, that standard, is often read into the proceedings that take place before the panel of 3 engineers. My view is this, that the standard is simply read into the proceeding to make it appear as if they have a high standard, but actually they do not have any standards whatsoever, certainly not the engineering standard, and so the actual standard is ignored. So whatever advice is given by the judge on what should be required of this organization is ignored. And so when you have a panel of 3 engineers, one of the primary goals is that the person who is practicing engineering has to be competent enough to take on the design. And so when you have a panel of 3 engineers, it's a requirement that those 3 individuals are suitably qualified in a matter that is before them. So if the matter is a structural matter, they have to be structural engineers in order to adjudicate. I find it quite odd that my own lawyer, who represented me in the discipline process, John Piemonte, could not point out to that body that the panel of engineers consisted of an electrical engineer. Electrical is nothing to do with structural. So this was grounds in itself to have this matter dismissed. And so if I was going to be proceeding to an appeal before the Supreme Court of Canada, which is a right, part of a process, these are the sort of arguments I would be making to have this matter dismissed. But I have not made that appeal. And the reasons for why I have not made that appeal is the subject of this video. So the structure was supposed to be a water tank. A water tank had allegedly failed when a complaint was made by a former client of my company. My company is called APEGBC Consulting Engineers Limited. Since I now do not have a professional license for some period of time, what I do have is a number of engineers working with me, probably more than me by myself when I was working under that company. So I was told by BC Registry the company has to change its name. The word engineers cannot appear in it, even though I have a number of engineers working with me. And so that itself does not make any sense. So there's a different process, perhaps a different video will be made to discuss that process, but I'm not going to dwell too much on that in this video. So now my company is called APEGBC Consultants Inc. So going back to the proceeding itself, my client, Blue Water Systems Limited, filed a complaint to the Engineering Association. That complaint was about 2 pages that started this whole matter. And then following that complaint, which was basically that a water tank had collapsed and that I had not done a proper design of it. This was the allegation of it. And so one has to appear before the peers, because we have to learn what has gone wrong. The focus of these proceedings most of the time is not to protect the engineer, the one that is paying the fees to this organization to regulate the profession. So when this complaint was made, then we started through my lawyer, John Piemonte, who was my corporate lawyer for APEGBC, and we went through almost a year and a half of letters requiring full disclosure, considering that public safety was an issue here, because this so-called tank had failed. And that disclosure was not provided to us. Now, one of the primary intents of this investigation is that it has to be done in good faith. Good faith is like a lawyer knowing that a genuine tank has collapsed. And so therefore, this collapse cannot be used in any way, when it's not a collapse, to set up an engineer from the ethnic community, which I belong to, the Sikh community. And it's a community that, unfortunately, does not speak out, does not stand up for their rights, even though we promote ourselves as being at the forefront of justice, because the religion itself stands for justice. And so politicians of the same community would ignore you. And so this is perhaps the reason why I am being targeted by APEGBC, because when you belong to our ethnic community, the expectation is the person that has moved here to a nation believes that he is equal under law. And going before a learned body, one expects the whole process to be done fairly in good faith. And so, going in more detail, for this scam is what I would call it, the process is normally like this. When a person is disciplined, we have a liability insurance. That is ANCON in this particular case. Then when a claim is made against a company for losses of a potential failure, those losses have to be paid by the insurance company. That's why we have insurance. So an adjuster gets appointed. The adjuster is Barnes Craig, and numerous people in that company are lawyers. For the Engineering Association, you have Jeff Thiel, who was at that time appointed for regulating professional engineers. Jeff Thiel was actually a partner of the adjuster company. It's stated there right in the letterhead, which I did not realize at that time. So that is a direct conflict of interest. The lawyer who is retained by the association to protect the interest of the association, considering that this is not litigation between two parties. It's regulating and finding out the reasons why a tank failed, so that the same errors cannot be made again. It is not true litigation, it's regulation. But the lawyer is retained in such a view as if they are suing me. And so Robert Hunter is selected from the company Bullhauser and Tupper. Well, that lawyer is also lawyer for Encon, my insurance company. That is also a direct conflict of interest. And so when a person is disciplined, one goes to a lawyer. So John Piemonte represented me in the discipline process, but the legal action that was commenced against my company, I had Singleton Urquhart and some lawyers from that firm who were appointed by Barnes Craig, the adjuster. So what was this tank all about? Now that you know there's so many organizations involved, and then Singleton Urquhart, who was supposed to be defending the legal action that was commenced against me, could have retained Sandwell Inc., which is the company that I once worked with, because that's one of the first companies I worked with when I came to Canada. And so it's a reputable company. They have large numbers of people working there. They do international projects. So because this project, this tank or structure was constructed in Venezuela, they were ideal for this investigation, where they could have gone out and done a simple report, and that could have ended this matter. And if they had done that, then essentially Encon would not have to pay, because there was essentially no proper tank at all or structure. Maybe it was someone being set up. And these indications were repeatedly given by my counsel, John Piemonte, through letters. And so it's important, now that the public understands what the process is, the hearing is held in a boardroom at the offices of the Engineering Association in Burnaby, BC. The whole proceedings are recorded. Three engineers consist of the panel, and essentially the lawyer represents the association. The John Piemonte represented my interest, and they are witnesses that are called for this investigation, and that investigation is supposed to assess why did this tank fail. So essentially it's no different to a courtroom, except everything is done in a boardroom. So that is the actual process of investigating an engineer. And then after the investigation has been done, in this case it took 3 days, then there's a penalty phase. And so they were recommending a suspension of 6 months, which we opposed, because strictly speaking, I was not really the engineer of record for Blue Water Systems Limited. And so it's important for me to describe the actual process of how an engineer gets involved in a project. Blue Water Systems Limited was my client. They retained me for reviewing an existing water tank drawing that they had installed in previous provinces and also states of America. And this tank generally consists of a circular tank, which is not elevated in the air, it's ground-based, and it consists of corrugated sheeting and a flat panel sheeting that is put together to form a wall. And so it's a circular tank. Outside of the wall are circular bands, which are basically referred to as radial bands, and they keep the tank together. Outside of the radial bands are vertical members. To the vertical members there are inclined struts, which are circular, and they have a thread which is within the strut that can be adjusted so that the force can be put into the tank walls. And at the other end, to do that, is based on sheeting which is based on the ground. So on the inside, there's a lining to ensure that the water stays inside the tank. So that essentially is the structure. It's 87 feet in diameter and about 12 feet high, just using approximate numbers. So now the public is aware of what this structure is all about. In order for this structure to be a water tank, it needs water pipes. And these water pipes are actually 3 in number. The first 2 are inlet and outlet pipes, and the third one is much like a overflow pipe, if you can use the analogy of a tub. So the inlet pipe is 2 feet in diameter and is buried in the ground. That is intended to bring the water into the tank. So it would have to be going into the tank space itself. And to empty it, in order for this tank to be operational, because one of the requirements of having a tank is that the water has to be distributed now. So you need an outlet pipe. The outlet pipe is also 2 feet in diameter and is buried in the ground. And it also ends up within the space of the tank. And so to empty it, you need outlet pipes. To fill it, you have inlet pipes. These pipes are clearly shown in the drawings that are signed and sealed. And from the photographs that they were delaying as part of the disclosure, the law firm, Wellhausen and Topper, I believe are fully aware that this tank had no water pipes. So if it's got no water pipes, the question then is, how do you empty it? And how do you fill it? Well, having described the structure to you, this is what's actually happening. This structure was not a water tank. It's what I've termed as an object of fraud, which I have used that terminology for the first time probably in my first book called Absolute Privilege to Deprive by Author House. The evidence of what I'm saying here is in that book. And when you have a tank or so-called structure without pipes and you cannot fill it, the only reason is that this whole structure was constructed to set up an engineer from the ethnic group. There was a failure of a water tank, but that structure failed well before this one was constructed to appear as a tank. Another engineering firm was most likely involved in that. And so there's only one way that you can empty a tank that has no outlet pipes, and that is to pull it to failure. In order for that to happen, one has to remove the inner galvanized plate of the wall, which is riveted to the corrugated panels. With the flat panels there, you cannot pull this so easily. So this was a structure that was constructed to set up an engineer from an ethnic community. Why are they doing this? Because they can. Because they believe no one's going to investigate it. And if this is kind of surprising to you, because there are pictures available in this book that show this. That it has no pipes at all. So how do you fill it? You fill it by trucks with tankers on it that contained water. And the trucks are then pumping this water over the top of the walls with pipes which are flexible about 4 to 6 inches in diameter. Because in order for this tank to be shown as a water tank failure, it has to have water in it. Without the inlet pipes, you can only fill it over the top of the walls. So now you can pull it to failure, take some pictures, and now you can say it's a water tank failure. That's the only explanation that I have. And so that was the subject of this investigation. In bad faith, where a whole number of organizations are fully aware that this is one of the biggest scams ever, probably in the world, when it comes to regulation of engineers. If this is how professionals are going to behave, there's no point of having a body. To go further, a report was provided by Westmar Consultants Inc. They provided this report. On the first page of this report, prepared by Paul Hu and another engineer, it states that the tank had collapsed on August 2nd, 2003. It states that the report was done and issued in September 2nd, 2003. And it states that 2 days later that they informed Akima Consulting Engineers Limited as part of professional courtesy. Because when an engineer takes on a project and provides an expert report, they cannot be involved in this project at all. It will be a conflict of interest. Because you can have companies that can say, oh, Mr. Randhawa did a bad job, or his companies did a bad job, and then take on the job. Now, with those dates in mind, the calculation sheet in the same report that's prepared by Paul Hu refers to a collapsed tank. The date on this sheet is in April 2003. So that indicates the tank had actually collapsed prior to April or in April 2003. And the tank had actually collapsed. And so if Blue Water Systems Limited was aware of this, and they had signed and sealed drawings by me with the knowledge that another tank had actually collapsed, then that is actually a major fraud. And that fraud is then carried on because the Engineering Association is going to support that fraud. Because you have lawyers who tell engineers this is what's going to happen. And so, did the panel of engineers not see this evidence? My lawyer, John Piemonte, who I trusted immensely, did they not consider that this is a problem here? That my lawyer is supposed to be representing my interest? And he doesn't speak out and says, hey guys, this is a setup. He could have made an application to the Supreme Court of British Columbia. And if it didn't succeed there, he could have gone even higher to the Supreme Court of Canada. But this is not investigation. This is not regulation. This is a professional body that's involved itself in criminal acts. And Westmar Consultants, they prepare this report to a building code. A water tank is not a building. A water tank is not a swimming pool. You do not design an aeroplane using a code of practice that's written for ships. Because one structure is flying in the air, the other one's floating in the water. And so professional engineers, 3 of them, with grey hair, with 20 years experience in excess of mine, could not determine that this is unprofessional conduct? You have degrees? You call yourself engineers? Are you listening to what I'm saying here, or is it just going on deaf ears again? When a person is going and talking to politicians in the Sikh community and he is ignored, he's writing to Parliament that there are safety issues here. Other tanks have not been investigated. And so Paul Hu comes up with a load case as part of the concepts of how a structure works. An engineer is supposed to look at the concepts. So he considers the loads. So take a beam, for example, of D plus L, where D is the dead load and L is the live load. So that's how you conceptualize the load on a beam. In this particular report, Paul Hu presents a load case of H plus W, where H is the hydrostatic pressure of the water inside the tank, and W is supposed to be the wind pressure that's acting on the outside. Even a child of 12 years old knows that that load case is not going to be valid for this case. A child will take a glass of water and blow on it. The pressure of the air coming out of this child's mouth is going to create ripples. That air under pressure is not going to go inside the water. The reason for that is very simple. Water has surface tension forces. It's not going to go inside the water at all. A child knows that. And so let me be a little bit sarcastic here, just to make a point. As if this wind which is blowing over the tank, as if it had thinking abilities. They can decide which way it's going to go. Do you think that wind is going to go inside the water when it can't, as I simply explained to you before? And then it's going to say, hey guys, let's go towards the tank walls and apply the pressure equally on the inside of the tank walls. Do you not see this? Like, how ridiculous this is? So H plus W is not a valid load case. And so that was simply dismissed as saying, oh no, the wind should have acted on the outside of the walls. So there's a sign change. In other words, it's not H plus W, it's H minus W. Well, let's consider that case. You think the wind is going to wrap around this tank like a person's hugging another person? You just say things for the sake of saying it without thinking what you're saying? Because the objective of this is you're not acting as learned professionals. You're acting as people who are stupid. So this was not regulation at all. This was a major crime by APEGBC and a whole bunch of organizations that are targeting people from the ethnic community so that the reputation of another engineer who works for another firm where a tank has failed, with political involvement here, where perhaps someone in Venezuela talked to another politician here. We can't have this company's reputation ruined here. So you pick on someone from the Sikh community. And because you know the judges of the Supreme Court are not going to expose this fraud, so what happens? A person is entitled to an appeal, and that appeal has to be before the Supreme Court of British Columbia. And so to do that, you go to a lawyer. In this particular case, I went to 3 lawyers, one after the other, because I wanted to tell that lawyer that I want you to go to court and tell them what is really happening here. That this is not a professional body, it's a body of criminals. And this was not a water tank. This was not regulation. But no, you want to spend more money doing an appeal by saying, oh, some analysis was not done. And Sandwell Engineering, who now have merged with another company from Australia, they're now called Osenko. Well, they couldn't go to the site and take pictures and provide a 2-page letter and say, hey guys, this is not a water tank. It's got no pipes. But what, you wanted to make $10,000 rather than protect the interest of a professional engineer from the Sikh community. And then at the penalty phase, which is a phase after the hearing, they provide a report that this tank could not have failed. In which case, they actually get Mr. Robert Hunter to rebut this report, saying this tank cannot have failed. and that this report is not worth it because the analysis was done that makes no sense. They did a finite element analysis on the connector. And that clearly does not evaluate the forces and where the additional force came from. What I had done when Blue Water came to me after the problem had occurred, after they had built it without my knowledge, sending the elements out there by a train, having it put in containers, all of that was done without my knowledge. They knew that this was not a water tank, that they were setting me up. And so Sandwell does this analysis, charges $10,000, and they couldn't provide this report at the beginning when he had the 3-day hearing. I want to appeal to the Canadian Parliament, in particular the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, that this is a major scam. And because of this major scam, rather than investigate it, they have proceeded with a policy of interfering with my other projects, in which my ex-partners are turned against me. My former brother Majid is exploited, and even if he's fully aware of this, or it doesn't matter anymore, because the damage has been done to the family relations. It's called irreparable harm. All those people who are doing the crimes have made money. They were not disciplined. Their licenses were not taken away. They were not imprisoned for doing crimes. And the RCMP have failed to investigate. And so such crimes are convenient to commit. And the ombudsman who I wrote to prior to the hearings, telling them, you need to attend this proceeding because I have serious concerns. If the profession is being regulated, and it's a learned profession, is the ombudsman capable of investigating this matter when there's no engineers there? Who regulates the regulators? And what are your duties as professional engineers that once you've involved yourself in a crime? Is it to carry on? And I'm fighting for every professional engineer in British Columbia. What are your duties? To walk away and not provide any assistance to me? Are you pleased that I'm losing income here? Is that who we are? I think I've said enough. I want this matter to be investigated. I don't think I need to send another affidavit. And other engineers who wish to contact me can do so by email, which is kuldiprandhawa5@gmail.com. That's KULDIPRANDHAWA5@gmail.com. God bless.